Good afternoon and welcome to the Fisheries Open House here in the Southeast region. We are so glad you could join us. My name is Jennifer Jackson. I'm the Regional Communications Manager here in the region. We are joined today by Fisheries Manager Carson Watkins and Fisheries Biologist Ryan Hilliard. So I'd just like to get started with a little housekeeping. There is a video that has been placed on this web page that you can watch if you haven't already. It's a 17-minute video that gives a background and some information, really good data for you regarding fisheries management here in the region, as well as some other interesting information. So it's a good opportunity for you to kind of get an overview. But what we're going to be doing today in this open house is actually taking your questions, your comments, your ideas that you'd like to share with us in real time, and we'll do our best to get all of those answered. Now, if you're catching this broadcast on the replay, or maybe later you think of a really great question you wished you had asked, you can still submit your comments to us online, or you can give us a call at the regional office as well. And you have until April 11th to do that. Now, you may be wondering how you can submit those comments or questions online. Well, there is a box that's appearing right now below this video that you're watching, and that is your online comment tool that you can use. So hopefully we'll be hearing from you. With that, I'd like to turn our time over to Carson Watkins, our Regional Fisheries Manager, and let's hear an introduction from him and some other information he'd like to share with you.
Thanks, Jenny. If folks will just bear with me for a moment, I'd like to pull up a few slides here so that I can kind of kick things off and orient everyone to the region here and to the process. Of course, today is focused on scoping new fishing regulations for the Southeast region. You'll know that there's similar open houses for the other 6 regions in the state, but this one is focused on our region here in the Southeast. This is the map that's pulled from our fishing proclamations, and just to give everyone an idea of the water bodies that are contained within this region. We have portions of the main stem snake, essentially from Gem Lake Dam near Shelley, down through American Falls to Walcott Reservoir. In addition to that, sort of moving in a southeasterly direction, our region contains the Blackfoot River drainage, the Portneuf River drainage, and the Bear River drainage, to also include Bear Lake. Our region is bounded on the south and east by the states of Utah and Wyoming. Again, the northern boundary is the Blackfoot River drainage. And in addition to that, sort of the northwest boundary of our region is the Big Desert. And so we have a team made up of 4 people in our fisheries program here in the region. We have 2 regional fisheries biologists. Those are Arnie Brimmer and Ryan Hilliard. Both of those folks focus on a variety of different fish population management and habitat management topics in the region. And that includes monitoring our fisheries to provide public input and things like that. And in addition to that, I'm the regional fishery manager. We also have a fishing and boating access program in the region, and our access site foreman for that program is Phil Stone. So again, we're here to visit with folks and share ideas about our 2022 through 2024 fishing proclamations and gather ideas and input relative to those. That is, of course, guided by our state fisheries management plan. Essentially, water body by water body, our state fisheries management plan lays out the direction that we'll take related to management of those fisheries. And so essentially, our fishing rules are congruent with the management programs within that overarching state fisheries management plan. Just a reminder as to what those look like for the Southeast region. We have, of course, our general fishing seasons and regulations. This is something that you'll find for each of the regions. And this lays out some of the basic rules that we have relative to species throughout the region. And so exceptions to those rules or special rules are follow that in our proclamations and are essentially a water by water body or managed on a water by water body basis and include water bodies or sections of those water bodies that have special regulations that are accepted relative to these general fishing regulations and try to guide management in a certain direction apart from how we would do it with our general fishing regs. And so the process is pretty straightforward. We're on the front end of this process, which includes scoping. But we're always scoping fishing regulations, and we're constantly hearing from anglers and interacting with the public on a lot of different things. And so we're gathering input and hearing feedback all of the time, and using that to inform this formal process leading up to the development of new regulations. But right now is our formal scoping period, where we're essentially going out and asking folks about their ideas relative to fisheries management in the region, and about some of the things that they would like to see relative to fisheries management. And so that period, like Jenny said, will last through April 11th. And it includes the videos that you'll find on our website, on our Southeast region page, that lay out sort of some of the details relative to this process, as well as some of the ideas that we've heard so far in scoping that we're interested in gathering additional feedback on. In addition to that, this open house is another forum for us to gather input and get some ideas from folks. But ultimately, these scoping ideas will result in formal proposals that will be put in front of our Fish and Game Commission. And then through the end of this process, we will essentially have a new set of fishing proclamations that will take effect January 1 of next year. And so I don't want to go into too many of the details, but basically I want to give an overview of what the intent of this process is here and why we're trying to interact with folks now. And so this is, again, an opportunity to suggest changes to our fishing regulations, to talk about things that are working, that aren't, and facilitate that two-way communication with the department and the public. And so we want to know what's on your mind. And we can trade ideas and talk about what's on our mind also, and what we've been seeing from some of our monitoring and things that we've heard from folks that aren't engaged in this meeting right now. Changes relative to our fishing regulations can be biological, social, or both, but they really need to focus on outcomes. And those outcomes are a response in our fish populations or potentially angler behavior. What we're doing now through scoping is not the formal development of proposals. These are not proposals that we're talking about today. This is just an opportunity to talk about things that could inform proposals at some point. And so again, we're sharing ideas, and we're here to listen to you and to lend an ear and perhaps provide some additional perspective from information that we have on some of those ideas. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jenny, and we can get into some of the questions that we have.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for that introduction to the process. So we do have a question that's coming in, and this is for Carson. So I'm glad you stayed online with us here. Can the department consider a more restrictive bag limit on the Snake River?
Yeah, so this is a comment, and thanks for this question, because this is a comment or a concept that has been put in front of us several times over the last few years. During our last regulation setting cycle, this particular concept came up. At that time, we had not had a lot of monitoring data collected on this reach of the Snake River, and we really hadn't put the parts and pieces of the fishery together to really inform folks about whether a change in the general 6-fish regulation to, say, a 2-fish daily bag limit regulation would be meaningful and could influence the fishery. What we do know, and what folks have been telling us, is that that section of the Snake River has gotten a lot more popular over the last few years. And so as some of our other wild trout fisheries have gotten increasingly crowded, folks are looking for other places to participate in some quality wild trout fishing, and this is one of those in our region. It's kind of been a sleeper for a long time, and folks are rapidly discovering that there's quality wild trout fishing there for a variety of species. And so since we heard from folks that there's some interest in using special rules to manage that fishery and some concern over potential overharvest, we got in there, we developed a monitoring protocol on that reach of the river so that we could start looking at trout populations over time to figure out how they ebb and flow and what impact anglers have on that fishery as they interact with it. And part of that was gathering information on what folks thought about the current management direction on that reach of the snake. And so we started off by gathering some basic angler satisfaction information about what they thought about the existing rules. And what we found initially was that an overwhelming majority of folks, some 85+% of folks that routinely fish that reach of the snake were in favor of the existing 6 fish limit and did not support a reduction in the daily bag limit to 2 fish at that time. Since then, with that information in hand, we've also been looking at just the mechanics of the fishery and how anglers interact with it. And part of that is getting a handle on the harvest rates that the various trout populations experience in that reach of the snake. And what we found is that harvest rates are relatively low. For wild rainbow trout and brown trout, they're typically in the neighborhood of about 10 or 12% annual harvest. For most wild trout populations, we don't necessarily get too concerned about the effect of harvest driving a population, the abundance or size of fish in a population down until those harvest rates exceed 20%. And so initially, that's not something that we're concerned about. But ultimately, long term, we're going to want to keep an eye on that and build it into some of our other monitoring so that we know how angler harvest might change through time and whether it's ultimately going to be influential on the type of fishing experience that folks have in that part of the Snake River, because it is becoming more and more popular all the time. So thanks for that question.
Okay, so our next question, it's actually a comment, is for Ryan Hilliard, one of our regional fisheries biologists. And Ryan, the comment has to do with Chesterfield and Hawkins. Please consider managing more waters for trophy trout. Places like Chesterfield and Hawkins can produce bigger trout if we didn't harvest so many.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for this comment. Looking at Hawkins and Chesterfield as a trophy trout fishery is something that would be interesting, although the opportunities for trophy trout fishing are spread throughout the region, and we need to continue to keep those spread throughout the region so there's that opportunity. But currently, Hawkins and Chesterfield are a harvest fishery, and those are what we've identified in our fisheries management plan to continue to have those as a harvest fishery and to keep the diversity of different angling opportunities throughout the region as an opportunity throughout the whole region. Thank you for that comment.
Okay, we have another question that's come in, and I'm going to direct this one to Carson. Can we start harvesting cutthroat trout out of Blackfoot River and Blackfoot Reservoir?
Well, the short answer to this question is that at some point, we hope that we can provide some wild cutthroat trout harvest opportunity in the Blackfoot River system. Right now, we do not offer that opportunity. And the reason is because our conservation efforts for cutthroat trout in that system are focused on increasing the number of fish that we have available, because we don't think that it can currently support it. Ultimately, though, that is a point that we'd like to get to. We monitor the escapement or upstream migration of adult cutthroat trout coming out of Blackfoot Reservoir to spawn in tributaries to the Blackfoot River every year. And so we monitor that population to see which way that it's trending. And it has been at very low abundance over the last 20 years or so. Initially, that population of fish was driven down in abundance due to overharvest. And so the regulations were tightened up, and they became more conservative in the early 90s in response to that. And ultimately, we wanted to get back to a point where we could provide harvest opportunity, but we're not there yet. There are a number of things that are limiting the population, like predation from pelicans, and we're addressing some of those things. And it's starting to show some fruit. And so over the last few years, we have seen the number of adult cutthroat returning to the Blackfoot River increase. And hopefully that trend continues, and it should, based on the different things that we're doing to influence that trend. And so we do have some target goals relative to that population that could potentially trigger an increase in opportunity. But I think ultimately what we'll do is we'll keep an eye on that population, see which way that it trends, and continue gathering the type of information that we need to inform whether a harvest fishery could be an option at some point. Thanks again for that question. That's a good one.
Okay, and thanks for sending these comments and questions. It really helps this process go so well, and we're excited to hear from you. So our next question is for Ryan. The Blackfoot Reservoir, or it's actually a comment, the Blackfoot Reservoir needs a 2 trout bag limit as opposed to having or allowing a 6 trout to be harvested. Ryan, could you address that comment?
Sorry, I was talking away there and didn't unmute. Anyway, that was a good comment. And at the Blackfoot Reservoir, in order to decrease the fishing opportunity or harvest opportunity to fish limit, it would not provide a diversity of fisheries as far as harvest opportunity, which is identified as in our fisheries management plan. So it's important to provide that opportunity and to allow harvest in this fishery. There was about an 8 to 9 year period that our stocking rates were not up to the amount that they were prior to those years. But in recent years, we've increased the amount of stocking, and those stocking rates should continue to supply the opportunity for harvest at this 6 fish limit. Thank you for that comment.
All right, thank you. Okay, this next question is for Carson. Can we start harvesting cutthroat trout out of the Blackfoot River and Blackfoot Reservoir? It's possible I may have asked to set the question all over again, and though it probably deserves more attention, we're going to keep on moving along. So let's see here. The next question is for Ryan. Can we start harvesting cutthroat trout out of Bear Lake? Have we asked that question yet? I don't think we have.
No, that's a new question, and thank you, Jennifer. In Bear Lake, there is the opportunity to harvest cutthroat trout. Just to clarify, you can harvest currently a hatchery Bonneville cutthroat trout, as hatcheries cutthroat trout are identified with a healed adipose fin clip. So currently you can harvest 2 of those fish. But in recent years, we have had anglers identify that they are catching more wild fish and want to have the opportunity to harvest those fish because of the increased catch rates on them. So in the last couple of years, we've had a research project looking at the cutthroat trout population in Bear Lake to determine if we could have a harvest opportunity on these wild fish. The study identified that even with a 30% harvest rate on these fish, we could continue to replace the fishery and have good catch rates, and that the size structure of fish throughout the cutthroat trout populations would remain large, and you could continue to catch these large size cutthroat trout. Thank you for the comment.
Okay, this next comment and question is for Carson. regarding some of the recent vandalism at the Edson Fichter Nature Area. And the question has to do with, besides expressing their sorrow that this has happened, they wanted to know if they were supposed to stay away from the community fishing pond or the nature area at this time. So Carson, why don't you take that question?
Yeah, thanks for this question. And we were disappointed to hear about this as well. We had an incidence of some vandalism there where folks spray painted some of the signage on our kiosks and then some of the informational signs that are scattered around the fishing game property there around the fishing pond. We are looking into it and trying to gather information that might lead us to resolve that issue and figure out who was responsible. But the bottom line is that we think it's safe to be out there and recreating on the property, and we are not discouraging folks from still enjoying it. So please don't let that keep you away.
Okay, yeah, thanks for addressing that. And I should note, we've already had some volunteers step up and are beginning the cleaning process. So a huge thanks goes out to our wonderful volunteers who both noticed the vandalism as well as helping us clean that up. So thanks to them. Okay, another question for Carson. Daniels and Treasurton should have a catch and release regulations. So could you address that comment?
Sure. Thanks for this question. Like Ryan mentioned before, one of the things that we try to do around the region with our flatwater trout fisheries is provide a diversity of different fishing opportunities. And so that includes managing some of our flatwater fisheries in a harvest oriented way or as yield fisheries so that people have the opportunity to catch and harvest trout. And we try to manage a number of our reservoirs in a little different way so that they provide better catch rates of larger fish. That doesn't mean that any of our reservoirs couldn't grow large trout. Many of them can because they're very productive. But again, we're trying to provide some diversity of opportunity around the region. In places like Treasurton and Daniels, they certainly could be managed under a catch and release type regulation. The issue at those, or not the issue, but one of the things to consider at those places is that some harvest opportunity is still important to a number of folks, and we've definitely heard that. And so the purpose of the fishing regulations that we currently have in place there is to provide still some limited harvest opportunity, but for that harvest opportunity to be better for some larger size or quality size trout. In some places, anglers have noticed that trout really don't exceed, particularly in Daniels, exceed the 20-inch minimum length limit because harvest pressure is high enough on some of those larger fish that they don't seem to be available in the fishery. That hasn't been shown in a lot of our sampling data. We do find that large fish are still present in both of those places in decent abundance. One place where anglers, though, may not be encountering as many large trout as they were before is in Treasurton. Treasurton specifically, of course, it's managed with special regulations to increase opportunity for large trout, but Treasurton was drained several years ago. And at that point in time, we also had some introduced largemouth bass that had been illegally stocked there. Having largemouth bass in that system is really not compatible with our management direction relative to trout. And so at that time, we used a chemical treatment when the reservoir was low to remove largemouth bass, and we essentially started with scratch with the trout population. And so a lot of those trout, that was only 3 years ago. And so a lot of those larger trout are still missing from the reservoir just because there hasn't been enough time for us to sort of build up some of those older fish that would be represented in the larger contingent of the population. But they should be there soon because fish do grow pretty well in that reservoir. And so just some additional perspective on why folks might not be observing some of the larger fish in Treasurton right now. But thanks for that question.
Okay, we have a comment that I'd like Ryan Hilliard to address. Fish and Game should close the Snake River below American Falls Dam during the winter. There's just too much pressure during the winter and it's affecting the quality of the summer season. Ryan, could you maybe address that for us?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for this comment and concern. Fortunately, the department has a long-term data set of information that we collect at a creel survey on opening day down here, down there below the dam on the Snake River. This long-term data set is a creel survey that has looked at catch rates, the quality of fish, and how many are caught to give an idea of how those change throughout the years. And according to the data that we have, since the catch and release regulation was implemented, the catch rates have actually increased on opening day, and also the size of fish that are caught has increased. So we're actually seeing that those catch and release regulations have not impacted our catch rates or the size of fish that are being caught on in particular on that opening day. Thank you for your comment.
Okay, so we've had a question come in. This person was wondering if we've submitted questions using the scoping input form, will those be addressed today in this forum that we have? So Carson, could you address that question?
Sure, thanks for the question. The questions that were previously submitted through the web form on our regional page will not be answered right now. Hopefully one of the questions that has been asked is potentially similar to one of the questions that this person does have. Our intent is to take the questions or the feedback that we get through the web forms and summarize those so that we can essentially provide information to our Fish and Game Commission about what anglers are thinking. But if you have a question that you want us to answer now, please type that into the web form below and we can answer it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm going to direct this question right back to Carson again. It's getting a lot of FaceTime here today. This is actually a comment. You should raise the cost of a non-resident fishing license. We have too many non-residents fishing. So Carson, if you could address that comment.
You bet. So the purpose of why we're here is to look at our fishing regulations, the regulations in our fishing regulations booklet. And we don't have a mechanism through this process to address this person's concern here, although it is appreciated and it is something that we will take note of. It's just that this isn't necessarily the process to address this particular concern.
Okay, so I'm going to direct this comment to Ryan. I would like to see wipers stocked in some of our waters. Ryan, could you take that comment?
Thank you, Jennifer. Wipers would be an interesting introduction for some of these waters that are predatory fish, but it would be a new introduction to the state. Currently, there are no waters that have wipers in them, so it would be a new process to identify the impacts that they may have on different fisheries and different waters. So we'd have to do an analysis on what waters they could be introduced to, how well they would do, and then also the interactions they would have with other species within that water body and how that would impact our current regulations and management of those waters. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a comment with the question, and I'm going to direct this to Carson. I'm concerned that the smallmouth bass in Blackfoot Reservoir might be negatively impacting our trout. Can we keep more bass to help protect our trout?
Yeah, this is a great question, and this is something that a concept that we talked about in the scoping video that you can find on our regional webpage. Because we have heard concern from folks about the presence of smallmouth in Blackfoot Reservoir, and it's something that through our monitoring data, we've had some internal concern about as well. So just for reference, Blackfoot Reservoir does not have a long history of smallmouth presence. They were first detected in the reservoir by anglers sometime around 2012 or 2013, and we first picked them up in our sampling back in 2015. At that time, they were pretty low abundance, and their numbers were low, in other words, and they weren't well distributed around the lake. And so we followed that survey with another one in 2018 to basically check back in on things, see what that population had done and if it had changed at all. And just in general, trying to lay some of the groundwork to keep an eye on what was going on with smallmouth. And during that survey, we found that their numbers had increased around 6-fold. So there were a lot more smallmouth in Blackfoot, and they were pretty much throughout the entire reservoir at that time. And a lot of the information that we were getting from anglers as to where they were catching fish and things like that indicated the same thing, that there were smallmouth bass throughout, and they were in pretty decent numbers, at least catchable. And so the reason why we were concerned about that is because obviously our fisheries management plan guides the department to manage Blackfoot Reservoir toward a cold water fishery that's composed of Yellowstone cutthroat trout and hatchery rainbow trout. And because smallmouth bass are a predatory species, they could have an impact on juvenile salmonids. And so what we are concerned about is that an abundant smallmouth population could have a predation impact on juvenile cutthroat trout and compromise some of our Yellowstone cutthroat conservation goals there. In addition to that, smallmouth predation on fingerling rainbow trout could compromise our ability to use that type of product to stand up the hatchery trout fishery out there. And so right now, there's no indication that smallmouth are having an impact, but over time, we will want to keep an eye on what's going on there to figure out if they do. Currently, however, and relative to this person's question, the general bass regulation in the Southeast region does provide some limited protection for smallmouth and Blackfoot Reservoir. And so it's a 6-fish daily bag with none under 14 inches. And so right now we're essentially offering some protection for smallmouth in the system. And that's not necessarily congruent with the management direction that we're provided for Blackfoot. And so one of the things that we are interested in gathering relative to public input from folks is whether that they are comfortable and accepting of a relaxation in the general regulations on Blackfoot to add an exception for Blackfoot Reservoir that would manage it potentially as a straight up 6-fish daily bag with no length limit restrictions. Primarily because not that we necessarily think that that change in the regulation is going to drive the smallmouth population downward, but what we are interested in doing is trying to align our smallmouth regulations in Blackfoot with our overarching fishery management objectives for the reservoir. But really good question, and sort of to give the short answer to that, yes, we can provide more opportunity there to harvest smallmouth, and that would be in direct alignment with our management direction for Blackfoot. So thanks.
Okay, so we're going to take a look at some other questions that are coming in, and I don't believe we have asked this question yet. This one's for Ryan. Why can't I keep trout year-round below American Falls Dam?
Thank you, Jennifer. The river below American Falls Dam is obviously a very popular fishery. And currently we've got two different views or opinions on the management of this fishery. As I talked about earlier, there was a question about limiting winter fishing and opportunity down there. And this one, in contrast, is actually asking for harvest. So there's a few different opinions on how that should be managed or regulations to help manage that fishery. So we invite the public to provide their input on what they would like to see down there. But currently, the population is robust. There is the possibility to allow harvest year round. But like I said, we want the public's input to determine where we should go from here and actually be able to provide an opportunity of harvest and also catch and release fishery if needed. Thank you.
Okay, good questions and comments coming in, and we really do appreciate that. We have another question for Carson. Looks like the Cutthroat and Blackfoot Reservoir are doing well. Can we do a study similar to what's happening at Bear Lake to see if it's time to start allowing harvest at Blackfoot?
This is a really great question, and I'm glad that someone asked it. The answer is that yes, we could. We're not scoping that right now for a variety of reasons that I described before. We have a cutthroat adult escapement objective. So the measurement of the number of fish at our weir on the lower Blackfoot River that are ascending the river to spawn, and that's 10,000 fish. And so that's a pretty robust goal or objective, and we could probably offer some limited harvest opportunity even if we were below that objective. We don't know where that sweet spot would be, but if we were to follow the Bear Lake model, that would be the addition of some kind of hatchery component to the population that was somehow marked so that anglers could identify them, and the idea would be that we could provide some cutthroat harvest opportunity on those fish. And so we could do that. And it's actually something that we're looking into now and sort of exploring by basically weighing our options about doing some sort of wild egg take for cutthroat because we interrogate most of those mature adults in the lower river. It provides a really good opportunity to be able to harvest eggs from some of those and start a hatchery program that would allow us to introduce marked wild fish, hatchery fish into the system that could support some harvest opportunity up to the point that our wild stock recovers and is then able to sort of replace that opportunity. And so the bottom line is that yes, we could implement the Bear Lake model at Blackfoot, and we're exploring some options that would help us do that. And I'm glad to hear that there's some public interest in doing that. So thanks for that question again.
Okay, Carson, don't go too far away. We have another couple of questions for you. Growth rates of trout in Chesterfield look great, suggesting we may be able to consider increasing stocking rates. Is that a possibility? If funding is an issue preventing increased stocking, would sportsman-led fundraising help in any way?
Yeah, this is another good question that I'm glad someone asked. So up till this year, we stocked around 32,000 catchable sized, which are 12-inch rainbow trout into Chesterfield every year. Beginning this year, we increased that request to 3,600 fish. 36,000 fish. And so we currently stock fish 2 times per year in the Chesterfield Reservoir. The total stocking figure is 36,000 fish now. And so we recognized that fishery was getting more pressure and that it could probably handle some additional catchable products. And so we did increase stocking there. And so it'll be nice to see how that plays out and whether that is resulting in better fishing. But it's too soon to tell since this was the first year. But the offer to have a sportsman group stock those fish, or at least fund the stocking of those fish, is appreciated. But hopefully the additional products that we're sending toward Chesterfield are going to fill that niche and provide some better fishing. Thank you.
Okay, and we have another question for Carson. Can the Black Canyon Reservoir fishery be improved by dredging to remove sand and silt?
Thanks for the question. My guess is that the Black Canyon Reservoir that this person is referring to is the one in Region 3 near the town of Emmett. That's actually where I grew up, so I can speak to it a little bit. The bottom line is I don't know if dredging that reservoir would improve the fishery at all, or increase habitat and space for the different fish species that are currently present there. I would recommend that this person get in touch with some of the fishery staff at the Napa subregion office, and visit with them about this particular topic. And I think they could probably provide some really good insight as to whether this is something that's reasonable or not.
Okay, looked like I had a bit of a snag in my back cast there as we're finishing. So we're going to wrap up right now. We had some really great questions that came in and we really appreciate it. We have through, again, a reminder, you have through April 11th to get additional comments, suggestions, and ideas shared with us. You can do that through this online comment process. You can also do it by just calling our regional office. Our phone number is 208-232-4703. Again, that's the regional office in Pocatello, and just ask to speak to one of our fisheries biologists. Remember, you're a really important part of this process, so make sure you share those awesome ideas that you have, and we look forward to hearing from you. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you so much for spending your time with us.